I work for a private maintenance company that services obsolete government facilities, including lighthouses that have been decommissioned but are still under occasional inspection. Most are routine visits: change batteries, check wiring, confirm solar panels aren't stolen. Last September, I was assigned to inspect a coastal lighthouse off the rocky coast of Nova Scotia. The island doesn't appear on commercial maps, and the structure hadn't been touched in over 20 years. It was only accessible by a small boat I operated myself. I was alone. When I arrived, the place was exactly what you'd expect: rusted bolts, salt-damaged glass, dead silence. I started the usual inspection, moving from the generator room to the radio tower. Everything felt dead, not just abandoned, dead. On my second night, while scanning through frequencies on the old analog radio, I caught a strange signal. It was faint, buried in static, but there was a voice, tired, terrified, repeating the same thing over and over again. "Don't let the light go out. Don't let the light go out. They'll come if you do." At first, I assumed it was a loop from some emergency recording, but when I checked the radio's logs, that frequency wasn't in the system. It had no record, no source, and shouldn't have even been accessible on modern hardware. I listened to it for almost 20 minutes, mesmerized, trying to trace it. Then all at once, the transmission stopped. At the exact same second, every light in the lighthouse died. My flashlight flickered, my radio crackled, and the temperature dropped instantly. I rushed to the generator room and tried to reboot the backup system, but the controls were unresponsive. That's when I heard something upstairs: slow, deliberate footsteps on the spiral staircase directly above me. Metallic, dragging, like boots soaked in seawater, slamming against metal grates. And worse, there was something else following behind those steps. A second sound, a slithering, scraping, like wet ropes or chains being pulled across the floor. I stayed absolutely still, holding my breath, crouched behind the control cabinet as the footsteps made their way down, one floor at a time. I whispered to myself that it had to be my imagination. I was alone, but then a deep voice, not human, not quite, rumbled down the stairwell. "You let it out." The air thickened. I could feel my ears ringing, my chest tightening like there was water around me, though the room was dry. Then, silence. I waited 30 minutes, didn't move, didn't breathe loud, until finally the emergency lights kicked on. I rushed back up the stairs, but everything was exactly how I left it. Nothing visible, but the lighthouse tower, where the actual beam light was on again, rotating, even though I hadn't touched that system. When I climbed to the top to check, the room reeked of seawater and something else, something decaying. On the glass of the beam, written in the condensation, were the words, "You heard him too." I didn't write it. No one else was there. I snapped a picture with my phone, but when I looked later, it was just static, like a corrupted file. Before I left the island the next day, I checked the base logs again. I found something buried deep in a corrupted file from 1963, a technician named Harold Doyle. His final log entry said, "He told me not to let the light go out." I did. Now it's never alone. No one knows what happened to Harold. They say he fell. Others say he went mad and jumped. But if you go there now and turn off the light manually, people claim they hear boots and a second set of steps dragging something behind. I sent this story to you because I know people will think I'm crazy, but I still have that voice transmission. I listen to it sometimes when I can't sleep, and every time, it sounds a little different. Last night, I swear, it said my name. My cousin Darren had just lost his IT job and was desperate for quick cash when he landed an overnight security gig at a coastal demolition site, a shut-down lighthouse off Oregon's cliffs, scheduled to be torn down in a month. The job was simple: stay in the attached living quarters overnight and report any squatters or trespassers using a basic motion sensor security system. There was no internet, no cell reception, and the lighthouse had no working utilities beyond backup lights. He sent me a video the first night, joking about how creepy it was. But by the third night, his tone changed. He texted me at 2:14 a.m. and said, "Why does the top room have a light? It turns on at random." I told him it was probably old wiring or a leftover circuit, he replied. No, there's someone up there. I can see her, just standing in the glass. That was the last thing I heard from him that night. When I called in the morning, no answer. I figured he passed out or his battery died. The following evening, he sent me a voicemail. All I could hear was loud wind, faint whispering, and a long dragging sound, like metal scraping over concrete. Then a female voice whispered something I couldn't make out. It wasn't Darren. That night, I got a second message from him, but he didn't speak. Instead, there were wet footsteps, rhythmic, walking in a circle, and then heavy breathing directly into the mic, followed by a sudden scream that was cut off mid-breath. I called the authorities. When they arrived, they found his boots neatly placed at the bottom of the spiral staircase. His phone was at the top on the edge of the railing, recording for over 3 hours. In the final moments of the footage, you can hear Darren crying, saying, "She won't stop watching me," again and again. But no one ever saw her. The only thing visible in the reflection of the glass was a blurred woman's figure pressed against the inside, even though no one else was there. The demolition company scrapped the project and blocked off the property. But a year later, I saw a post online from a hiker who said she spotted a woman inside a lighthouse, up the coast, staring out over the ocean. The photo looked exactly like the one Darren described. Same structure, same broken railing, same dark-eyed woman in the lantern room. I sent the hiker a message asking for details. She said the place wasn't even on the map. Said she tried to go up to the glass room, but when she touched the door, she heard someone scream from inside her own head. She left and never went back. They say the woman used to be the lighthouse keeper's wife, that when he drowned, she walked up to the top and never came down. But Darren didn't know any of that. And now I have his voicemail saved, because sometimes when I play it backwards, her voice becomes clearer, and she says my name. My friend Liz is a travel photographer who rented an old Airbnb lighthouse in Maine last October, trying to catch some dramatic autumn coast shots. The listing described it as a restored heritage property with authentic isolation, and she was excited for the piece. She brought her dog Max, a German shepherd who usually slept anywhere. But this time, he refused to go near the spiral staircase leading to the top. On the first night, Liz heard thuds above her room at 3 a.m. Someone pacing, dragging something heavy across the floor, slow and steady. She thought it was a storm or the house creaking, but Max growled all night and stood with his eyes locked on the ceiling. On the second night, things got worse. The lighthouse's beam suddenly turned on around midnight, even though the rotation controls were supposedly shut down years ago. Liz climbed the stairs to check it out and saw fog outside, and someone standing on the outer balcony, motionless, facing the sea. She opened the access hatch and stepped out, but the balcony was empty. No wet footprints, no sound of footsteps leaving. She went back down and locked her door. That night, she took pictures through the window of the rotating beam to get some long exposure effects. But in every frame, even though she was alone, there was a shadowy figure standing just outside the glass, sometimes behind her, sometimes ahead. She showed me those photos later. What creeped me out was how clear the shape was. A man in a rain jacket and cap, holding an oil lantern, head slightly tilted. He looked exactly like Thomas Halloway, the last recorded lighthouse keeper who allegedly died on the job in 1991, swept out to sea during a storm, except his body was never recovered. The next morning, she called the property owner, who calmly told her, "Yeah, Thomas still wanders the tower now and then. It's harmless unless the light stops." Liz laughed, thinking it was a joke. But that night, a storm knocked the power out. With the light disabled, Max started barking so violently, he nearly tore the door down. Liz heard chains dragging again. Then, someone knocked on her door. 3 slow knocks. Not the wind. She didn't open it. Instead, she waited behind her bed, phone recording, Max growling nonstop. When the power returned 20 minutes later, the knocking stopped, but there was a trail of wet footprints leading down the hall. She left the next morning. When she got home and developed her camera roll, half the images were corrupted. The ones that weren't showed Thomas standing closer, more defined, always in the background. She hasn't spoken about it since. I'm telling this story because Liz won't. She hasn't picked up her camera in months. And recently she called me crying, saying the lantern light came on in her backyard. And she doesn't even own one. They say lighthouse keepers never really leave their posts. They just keep watching, even when no one is supposed to be there.